Barbara.
I'm Cheryl.
And I'm Naima. We're three Black moms.
Good evening. You know, any of us who have ever flown on an airplane could pretty much recite by heart all the instructions that the flight attendants give us. One of those, along with telling us where the exits are and how to follow the lights and how to put a life vest on in case of a water landing, is the one that most of us probably have the most trouble with. Put your own oxygen mask on before you help someone else. Now, as moms, we think about this and think, I'm going to put the one on my kid first. But as you get older and you start thinking about it, if you can't help yourself first, you may be incapacitated before you can help someone else. And in that vein, we want to talk about the Buffalo shooting this week. How traumatized we as a people, as a Black community, have been by this absolutely evil, abhorrent, racist act that killed 10 people and injured 3 by someone who was just 18 years old. And as we think about that, this is traumatizing for our children, but it's also traumatizing for us. So how do we, my sisters, and our guest, try to work with facing the trauma that we all have faced and healing ourselves so that we can heal our children?
Yes. Well, that is definitely something we have to look at because we can't ignore what's happening and we can't expect them to pretend like it's not happening. It's all over the news and we don't always know, especially when they act out, why. So one of the things we wanted to do, of course, is invite our guest today, Dr. Ron Ford, who's got a wonderful show every Tuesday. And it's called Ask Dr. Ron. And it gives us a chance to really examine a lot of the sociological issues. He's got a doctorate in philosophy and has had many different issues raised that have to do with our maladjustment to this very twisted society that we've been in for the past 300 plus years. And of course, as you know, nearly 30 years ago, my husband and I wrote this book, Slavery, the African American Psychic Trauma, explaining how we're perpetually traumatized by the fact that this situation has not ended and it's still very violent. So, want to give our guest an opportunity to give us some tips, perhaps. How do you talk about this when your children are sitting there watching television, seeing this horrendous thing? And how do you keep them from being too afraid to go outside or even being afraid of white people or even feeling like helpless victims, especially when we're having those kind of feelings ourselves?
Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me to the show to be with you, lovely ladies. It's a pleasure and an honor to be here. And, it's interesting that, you bring this subject to me because this is a subject that I have been dealing with since this event has taken place. And I don't have little children. I have grandchildren, but I have adults, as children. I have daughters. I have a son. And they're looking at these things, still trying to get grip and understand what's going on. And I do a multitude of shows throughout the week. And one of the things we talked about on my Thursday show was Street News Now, shameless plug. Uh, one of my co-hosts was talking about the parenting skills of this young man, and he went into tears, trying to describe that this is not something that he woke up with a problem just on that day and acted out of that problem. He has had, I'm gonna make a couple of references here, so all you Bible scholars don't beat me up. Whatever seeds that were planted into that young man took root and came forward. And they had to know what kind of issues that he had as a younger person, and then allowed those problems to manifest at 18 and continue to manifest. So it's something that, his parents are not saying. They're not, willing to come forward and say anything at this time. They're not even willing to apologize, so that's deep in itself. When you've got a group of parents, a father and a mother. That's why I say a group, because some folks don't even have that. And they have been watching him develop, and they have been putting this hatred in the hemisphere and in the air to the point where he acted off of, what he considered to be his comfort zone. That was his comfort zone, to be able to do these things. I had a conversation with my son, who's 30 years old. He's one of a twin. And I was talking with him on this week, and he shared a story with me. He works for a uniform company, and they put him on the most racist route that exists in Tennessee. He's in rural Tennessee, countries, places where people see him, and they know he's different from them. And he described a situation where a Karen called the police on him. Now, we all know what that word Karen means, right? I don't want nobody to be left out on the story.
It has a meaning now.
Yeah. So she was definitely, trying to get him in trouble. And my son was smart enough to stay and wait for the police to come and, explain to him, I'm just here to do my job. And this lady, I don't know what she told y'all, but this is what the real deal is. And then, the first thing out of the police mouth was like, who you work for? Now he got a uniform with the name on it. He got a truck with the name on it, but they were really trying to hem him up to a position where they can take this scenario and escalate it to another direction. Well, they had to eventually let him go, and he went on about his business. So when he was telling me this story, the one thing that dropped on me was that, son, you are behind enemy lines. Okay. And I need you to be aware of everything that's going on around you and what possibly can happen to you behind enemy lines. Now, I use that analogy because, 30 years old, most young people in that age group from 18, maybe even 13 on up, they play video games. So they know about Call of Duty. I don't know about Call of Duty, but they do. Okay. So, I'm like, you're behind enemy lines. So you need to be careful what you are doing so that you can get back to where it's safety for you. Because everything that's going on in the area where you are could really turn out to be a very negative situation. And I issued that warning to him with the intention of keeping him aware of what's going on. Like, I don't need you walking around, not aware of what could possibly happen to you anywhere at any given time when you're just trying to do your job and get paid and get back home.
So what do we do? I mean, do we encourage our children to not take jobs in areas where we know that there's high levels of racism? Do we avoid those areas? Do we stop going to certain neighborhoods? I know I used to hear stories about how Black people didn't go in certain parts of the city because they knew it was racist. And then there, of course, anybody who knows about Marquette Park, and Dr. King went here and they hit him in the head with a rock, and the whole nation saw that, and it was known that that was a very racist area. People didn't cross those lines. It was like being behind enemy lines. So do we allow that? Do we allow ourselves to be restricted on where we can go because we know that certain areas are known to house racist attitudes and it could be dangerous? Or do we teach our children just face the fear and don't let anybody make you feel like you can't go somewhere? What do we do?
Well, we have to, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. We have to make our children aware of where they are at all times. Otherwise, they could suffer consequences for not being aware. And, we had this conversation. Well, should we arm ourselves? Yes. Yes. Like Malcolm X said, yes, you need to be prepared for the battle, that you're in. You're not in a knife fight, you're in a gunfight. Okay. You need to be aware. You need to be able to protect yourself. And I remember back in the 50s and 60s, and you're talking about just modern day and in the day of Martin Luther King, when our families used to travel from the north to the south, it was commonly known, do not stop in Mississippi nowhere for nothing. Okay. So we are now in 2022, and the way the system has raised this evil head again, we are almost on the verge of those types of situations and scenarios again. So now I don't encourage anybody to say like, okay, well, ain't nothing gonna happen to me. I can go anywhere I want to go, do anything I want to do. I'm not gonna encourage people to do that. I'm gonna encourage people to be aware, be conscious, be safe at all times. If there's certain parts of the city of Chicago that represent more danger and more hazard, then be aware of those areas. And when you go into those areas, go do what you got to do and get on out of there. You don't need to be hanging out in places where it can cost you your life.
Well, I know. I mean, Barbara, of course, you live in the South, and in your upcoming book, you tell a story about how you all were just out, talking about Jesus with your religious community and got basically accosted by police who were very nasty, very rough, and taken to jail. And it could have escalated, So what do you?
And there was nobody to film that incident.
Yeah, didn't have Facebook Live.
It was before cell phones and before the internet, which I want to also bring up the fact that there is a feeling of fear that is felt. Having read part of this young man's manifesto, I'm telling you, you can hardly get through more than 10 pages. The guy says really crazy stuff. Number one, he started picking up on this attitude of race hatred at the age of 12. Everything he learned from the internet. He admits that he's a white supremacist. He admits that he is a racist. He admits that he doesn't like anyone who is not white, and that everybody needs to go back to their own country. He spews that kind of stuff. But the fear is that white people are being replaced. And that is what his fear. Now, obviously, if he's 12, just now starting into this kind of thinking, his parents taught him that. Where else do you get that kind of stuff? And his whole thing is fed off of that. So, of course, if he's learned that from his elders, from the people that are nurturing him as a kid, the level of that kind of hatred did not spawn from a kid who just made this stuff up because he saw it on the internet. He was fed that kind of fear, that kind of hatred, probably from his own parents, which is why you're not hearing them say anything. I mean, the kid has this manifesto. He's writing all this stuff. saying all this egregious type comments. And my thoughts are, to get at the root of those kind of problems, you're going to have to dig even deeper than an 18-year-old that goes off, because he is not the only one. Obviously, he has friends who think like this. Obviously, he has relatives who think like this. So the vein of this kind of hatred flows deeper, but it is based on fear, and it's based on false fear. And anyone who is operating out of fear will do things that are extremely outrageous, unthinkable, and just, for lack of a better word, just crazy. And I'm thinking of the time when, like I said, or like you, Naima, pointed out, when we were out on the street just witnessing, and a police officer jumped in our faces and told us to get out of there. We were going to jail. We had done nothing to bother him, disrupt him, but he used that power he had. Who knows what caused him to overact the way he does? But we acquiesced. We got in the patrol wagon and got taken away and then released the next day. And then the cops didn't even show up the next day. It was, oh, well, your case is dismissed. They didn't even show up. It was just an inconvenience on our part. But in terms of training our kids, there is more than just telling your child to be aware and to always know about your surroundings. We tell women that. We train all of our women to always be aware of your surroundings, especially if you're out certain times of the early or late evening, to be able to defend yourself if you are accosted. But the training has to go further than that. It can't just be with our own children. And this is where you're talking about an entire revamping of society. My son, when he was driving, was pulled over by a police officer. And the police officer was extremely nice to him, apologized for having pulled him over, said, it was something like your tail light was out or something, and I'm really sorry to have to pull you over. And if you promise that you will not, that you will get this fixed, I won't even have to write you a ticket. And his sister, who was in the car with him, was like, wow, I wish Chicago police were like this. I never heard of such a thing. I mean, and the police officer, he's like so polite and just,
you have to tell your audience,
yeah,
they were in Australia.
Yeah, a whole different country.
Throw that in there at the end.
Yes.
Talk about burying the lead.
Right. Yeah, that puts a whole different spin on it. In Australia, police officers, apologizing for pulling you over. No, that wouldn't happen in Chicago.
But this is one thing I want to mention, because Barbara, I was thinking the same thing when Dr. Ron was speaking. I said, what we're telling our children is the same thing that women have always been taught: be aware, be careful, don't go places, don't put your earbuds in and go running, or all of those other things that we have to do because we know we are being terrorized. The problem is that because someone else is a terrorist, and I keep saying, this is a white people problem, but because someone else is committing domestic terrorism, we are trying to make ourselves smaller and smaller and smaller so that we don't become targets. And I'm concerned because, and I have a daughter, grown daughter, and I'm concerned about all of those things, by her being female, by her being a female of color, even though, in certain
by her being pretty,
but the thing is that the people who raised this child, because nobody's asking where were his parents when he was 12, 13, 14, 16 years old and decided he was going to become radicalized. Nobody's asking where his parents are, but us Black mamas, our kid does, steps off the curb wrong, and our kids are demonized. But the thing is that I want to know what tools we can use so that we can continue to raise strong adults, because the answer isn't necessary. I mean, we always have to be aware. We know that as Black people, we know that as women, But the thing is that we've gotten to the point where we're letting them win. And this whole thing about the great replacement theory that they want to preach, but they don't want to teach quote unquote critical race theory because they don't want people to know that grandma was out there throwing rocks at a 6-year-old to keep her from going to school. Those kinds of things are things that I want to know, how do we address so that we can say there are evil people out there who will not like you because of the color of your skin. And that is their issue. Yet we need to keep you safe. I mean, we're like trying to put our mask on first so we can help someone else. So Dr. Ron, what are some of the tools that we can tell our children that you are still not just a child of God, you are divine in your own right, and you have every right to be here, but be careful.
Well, one of the first things is we have to acknowledge that there's a problem. So,
Yes.
So we do realize that there is a problem that Europeans have against us that we had nothing to do with. So we need to be able to continuously protect ourselves and instruct our children and our families of the safety steps that we have to take. And some of these steps is like what we just talked about, the same thing that you would tell a female, a daughter or elderly person, don't do this after dark, or, don't go to the currency exchange because you never know, who's lurking to rip you off. Those are safety steps. And some of the things that I would suggest, and this is just me, you all, because I don't want nobody to, come along later and say, well, you say it.
Nope, that's
We
why
need
you're
to
here.
sit down with our children and begin to tell them the history of what, Black families have gone through, as you alluded to in critical race theory. Critical race theory is something that, I talk about all the time because they don't want their ancestors to know, or their children to know, what their ancestors have done. Okay, they want to try and brush it under the rug and say, well, no, we don't want to tell our children. Well, they won't let the victims of the Holocaust, forget what happened to them. And they keep it on the forefront of every celebration and every anniversary. They have anniversaries, commemorating what happened to their ancestors. And it's just as important for us because the blood of our ancestors cries out that we never let them forget what happened to them. Okay. So the most important thing is to admit that there is a problem. And no matter how much we want to try and be, pardon the expression, Billy Badass, and say, well, their problem ain't my problem, and I can go anywhere I want to go and do anything I want to do. No, you're putting yourself in harm's way.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Go
ahead.
Dr. Ron, how do we keep our children and ourselves from being paranoid to the point where we react to every white person as if they're the enemy, and we even, like Cheryl was saying, start to make ourselves small, where you start hiding? I had a friend back when I was in Nebraska. I guess he had been traumatized by a police incident early in life, and we'd be walking down the street talking, and a police car would drive by and he would shrink up and hide behind a bush. I mean, it was like somebody that had PTSD, which I guess in some instances he did. And he started speaking in a whisper. And I knew that his response was definitely not normal, but I don't know what he had gone through early in life that produced that response. But that's what he did every time a police car drove past on the street. This was back when I was in college. So that means, we were like, 18, 19, 20 years old. And this is how he dealt with it. So how do we keep ourselves and our children from responding so extremely out of fear because every now and then some nutcase pops up?
Well, this would speak to therapy. Could you speak on that?
Well, I'm going to use an example. Like when you talk about females who have been traumatized, every person they run in contact with or come in contact with is not going to be an attacker. So it takes time. It takes time to be able to, convince that person that whatever evils that have come their way, they can still survive. We are all survivors, and we have to put ourselves in a survivor's role. If we see things like what have happened, we need to understand that we are survivors and we have to act as though we're survivors, but yet we still have to be aware of everything that goes on around us all the time. And even if a person who has been traumatized, like your friend, in Nebraska, he needed to be able to have the confidence of being able to see a police car and know that they're not after him this time. Okay. Now,
I know with some black men, it's almost like every time that is what they go through.
Yeah, but the next time might be his turn to get messed with, because you can act suspicious and cause things to happen to you too. So you don't want to put yourself in a suspicious mindset. Okay. It's just like when you say women don't dress provocatively, because you're going to be inviting things onto yourself that you don't want. And you're not interested in entertaining those type of, accusations or comments or whatever. You don't want that. So don't put yourself in that position. So when we start talking about dealing with a treatment plan, there really has not been a clear, defined treatment plan to deal with this type of atrocities that have happened to Black people and people of color for the thousands of years that we have been experiencing them. So to be plain and truthful, all we can do is defend ourselves and protect ourselves to the best of our ability. So when you start talking about a treatment plan, what's your safety plan for yourself when you start dealing with situations and come in contact with things that don't feel right? Now, one of the things that I can say is that we all have a sixth sense, whether we know it or not. We need to listen to it.
Yes.
We need to pay attention to, like, what they talk about on the television, your spider senses, or your tingling sensation. Something ain't right. Women have it better than men sometimes. Men walk around oblivious to a lot of things, and then all of a sudden, wow, I didn't even see that coming, and the next thing you know, they're in the midst of something. But women be like, come on, let's go right now.
Yeah.
Well, right. In Buffalo, though, there was nothing to say, don't go to the store that day.
No.
These people, they're in their own neighborhood. They're shopping in their own shopping center. They are carrying on life as usual.
As normal.
When a stranger who is driven 4 hours to go and wreak havoc in their neighborhood because of the crazed thinking of his own mind. How do you guard against that? What are you going to do? Put guards in front of every establishment that a Black person has to go to?
Well, and that sounds extreme, but in some institutions they've gotten to that. And I bring up the point about the Chicago school system. They have armed guards that have metal detectors. So if a child comes in that building, they're going to check his book bag. They're going to check everything before they allow that person into that school for safety precautions. Now that's extreme. So, in some places I've heard people say, response and say, well, if you arm everyone that's allowed to be able to have weapons, then that'll make a person think about trying to come at you, because they know that everybody is armed in that area, right, to carry.
But then you have Philando Castile, who had a conceal and carry permit and got shot to death. So
exactly, and that's the problem, is that it becomes like what they said, the wild west, if everybody's armed, but even more than that, what I want to bring up, because Dr. Ron, is because when you say about the metal detectors in our public schools, those tend to be in Black and low income areas, but
yes.
The school shootings are not our kids.
Yeah,
Well,
the
not
mass shootings have been in the white areas, like
they're in the
Columbine.
That's right.
white areas, and those are in affluent areas, and those are the kids that are going in and shooting up the schools. They don't have the same resource officers in Parkland. The school resource officers ran and hid. So uh, so arming, even having armed police officers doesn't help, except it hurts our kids, because a lot of times they will arrest our children and add to that school to prison pipeline thing. So and like Barbara was saying, how do you stop from living your life? It's like not after 9/11, and President Bush was saying, don't stop going to the shopping malls and things like that. Live your life. Because but we have to, I guess I'm trying to say that there's terrorism that's coming from our own country.
Mm-hmm.
And until maybe we need our representatives to get involved and say, we will stop this domestic terrorism, because the FBI has even said that white supremacy and and nationalism are the biggest threat to our democracy right now. Those
Yep.
are the biggest terrorist threats.
Yep. And you can thank President 45 for that.
Oh,
He'll
absolutely.
he came forward and said it's okay to have this type of mentality. It's okay to attack people of color. It's okay to attack Mexicans. It's okay to attack Asians.
Yep.
He said it's okay. So and once again, and I know you are looking for concrete answers, and I'm sorry I don't have a concrete answer for you,
Or even
because
suggestions.
but there is no treatment plan for for us to be able to say, people of color, Black, African American, whatever you go by this week, we don't have anything concrete to be able to say, other than we need to warn our children. We need to talk to our children. We need to sit down and let them know that there are, just like you would do in any other scenario situation, there are demons out there waiting to attack us. So, the Bible says, put on the whole armor of God. Well, that's only part of it. Okay. You got to know, just like they have crises drills in schools.
Right.
Okay. They tell children to get underneath the desk in case of a hurricane, or if you hear a noise that sounds like a weapon. And it's sad to say, most young people know what weapons sound like.
Yeah.
Get underneath a desk and hide someplace where you can't be seen until the all clear sign has been given. Those are
now even have a getaway room where all the
Mhm.
kids go in, they close the door, and no one
And
makes
lock.
a
That's
sound.
right. And that's some of the things that happen that they teach our children in schools, because we live in that day and era and that time. So as they transcend into adults, we have to still give them the same type of warnings. Okay, you ain't got a desk to hide up under right now, but you got to know how to get low. You got to know how to, steer away from the attack, and not, be a victim of the attack. And you're absolutely right. Those people, when they went to the grocery store that morning, did not know that that was the last trip that they were going to ever take in this lifetime. And there are other people, unfortunately, I hate to say this, there are other people with the same mentality as that 18-year-old young man, who has the same type of seeds of hate against a race of people that his parents put into him. They have it also. They come in groups, they come in packs, and whatever the mentality to try and justify the way that they feel, it is definitely an issue that we, being the victims, we're being hunted.
Yes.
We're the prey. So we have to try not to be the victim of the day, or the week or the month, and we just have to be on our P's and Q's all the time. We talk about in America sometimes people who live in war-torn countries. They wake up every day knowing that bombs are coming in.
Right.
Okay. They wake up every day knowing that it's going to be some type of shootout in their community that day, from the enemy. So it's unfortunate. We're supposed to be, and I use the word supposed to be, we're supposed to be in a civilized country, but yet some of the people that are in this country with us are not so civilized, and we have to act as if we know this. And we need to deal with our families. And I said this the same way I told my son, we are behind enemy lines. And until we get it all clear, we can't act like, okay, we're going to, pretend like this didn't happen and it doesn't happen until the next time it happens. Then we're going to say, well, that's an isolated incident. But guess what? That isolated incident could be in your community, in your neighborhood, or in your grocery store or your Walmart, and unfortunately, we have to protect ourselves at all. Malcolm X said that to us. He said that to us. By any means necessary, we need to protect ourselves. We need to be prepared to protect
Well,
ourselves. Go ahead.
I think that the greatest weapon that we have, I think the greatest weapon that we have is in the power to influence thought of the next generation. Yes, you have some young people that have been poisoned by their parents and by these various extremist groups, but I think you have a whole lot more that are disgusted by it. When you look at what happened with the George Floyd incident and all the various marches across the country, you had a lot of whites, a lot of Asians, a lot of Hispanics, a lot of people of all groups that were fed up with the violence and the hatred. And I believe that group is stronger than those radicalized white supremacist groups who are believing they have the power to terrorize people into cowering into a corner where we don't live our lives. Just like America responded to the outside terrorists and saying America strong and all this, we gotta come up with that same kind of attitude, that slogan, that same strength that says we're not going to let you win. You're not going to make us back down. You're not going to make us hold our head down. You're not going to make us talk softer. You're not going to make us be less than who we are. You can't win because we're on the right side. We're on the side of good. We're on the side of God. We're on the side of power. And we're not going to fear you. And you cannot change that. We got to have that same kind of response of strength and teach it to our children. Teach it. They cannot win. Evil can never win because there is only one power in the universe, and that's the power of God, and that's the power of good. That's the side that always wins. Yes, you're going to have a few nutcases, but they're not going to win. And we have to keep saying that and saying that and saying that to ourselves and to our children so that they know that is not something they ever have to fear, even though we must be aware, have our antenna up, have our instincts up. And when we see somebody acting strange, move away from them or be on guard. If we got to get ready to defend ourselves or take them out or whatever it is, if we feel like somebody's going to accost us and we can't get away, but we definitely have to not face anything with fear. And I think that has to be the stance that we take, and we keep reiterating it so that all of those who are believing that they can go back to the days of Jim Crow and we're afraid to walk the streets, we're not going back. And we have to teach that to the next generation, all races of the next generation. Hatred will never win on this earth.
And you're right about teaching it to the next generation. I would say in a very compelling way, it is important for people who are in the teaching industry, who are with kids many more hours of the day, even than their parents are, when they recognize these signs of discontent, things that are not quite right. And you can sense, even as young as 5 years old, the path that a child is heading toward by the way they respond to certain activities, even in the schoolyard, even with their classmates. And sometimes parents are not willing to address these small discrepancies in their kid because they're busy being defensive. No, I got a good kid. He doesn't do anything wrong, blah, 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 blah. But there are different signs that show that there is either sociopathic types inklings that a person may have, something that shows that they have areas where things are not, and you can't always put your finger on it, but you know when something is not right and you need to be willing to address it. So between a teacher seeing something, I know myself as a teacher, when I have brought up things sometimes to parents, they are extremely defensive. They don't want to hear that their kid may have some kind of mental illness that has to be taken care of. And then that thing grows, and then the larger the classroom, the more likely that thing is going to fall through the cracks, where you're just saying, oh, they just have behavioral problems. And sometimes it's physical, mental, it might be emotional, but any of those characteristics that contribute to a person leaning toward sociopathic, psychotic type of behaviors that turn into an 18-year-old that wants to shoot up anybody that isn't like him.
Well, it's interesting that you say that, because he had been treated for mental illness 2 years before, and they let him go. The same thing with the kid who shot up the school, I believe in Indiana, where where the parents were complicit, and then they went on the run because they were complicit. He also had been evaluated, but they did not check his backpack when they said, well, no, we don't want to take him home. And so they let him go back to class, where he promptly, emptied it, went to a bathroom, and then started and came out shooting. So, there's also, all as parents, we've always been defensive, even if we know that our kid has done something wrong. That's just who we are. But you also have, but that parent also has to know that that there's something wrong, and we have to give them the tools so that they can address it. And we also have to, as educators, psychologists, school resource officers, we also have to insist that those people address it, because other people's lives are in danger. Other people's.
So, Dr. Ron, do you think that if parents were given some type of punitive measure, if parents had to do time or pay a fine or something,
it's too late then, though.
We hold
or training,
and let them know that if your child commits an act of violence, you can do time because you should have seen the signs. We hold you responsible for their behavior. Is that fair? Is that just? Could that be a deterrent?
Absolutely. Parents are responsible, especially when this young man is only 18. His parents should definitely be held accountable for the actions of an 18-year-old with a loaded weapon, body armor. These are not toys that you find at a electronic game store. These are all items that you would get if you go join the military, and then you're under supervision of sergeants and trainers to teach you how to use these things. So, I'm even going out on a limb and say somebody had to teach him how to do this stuff.
Ooh.
Kyle Rittenhouse was only 17.
Yes. And his mama drove him with a loaded gun to participate in a riot. Okay. So parents, and she got off. They didn't even charge her with anything.
Yeah, they both did. Yeah.
And that's white privilege all over again, and that's what we're dealing with.
That's a whole other show.
Yeah, white privilege, But yes, absolutely. If they started to hold parents accountable for some of the actions that some of these armed children, have done, then you would see a whole different attitude about allowing them to get a hold of things that they could, use to cause harm to folks. But once again, like you said, it's a whole nother show. We're talking about white privilege, because in a white family, they feel like they have the right to bear arms, at 13 or whatever. They feel responsible enough to be able to drive a car on a dirt road, fire a weapon, at hunting, things of that nature. But they are definitely responsible and should be held accountable. Now I want to address something you just said a little while ago about, being able to stand up. you know, and I want to say that I admire each and every one of you ladies on the panel. I've seen your show at least one time. And you all have a very strong voice to be able to stand up and oppose, injustices with your voice. I am a black man. I am looked at as a person to be feared just because of the skin color that I carry. Okay. So the attacks and the dangers are far greater for a black man than it would be for any female. Sometimes women are more dangerous and they just don't know it. But
Oh, you know it.
because men would be like, I'm not going ready to do that. The next thing you know, a woman standing out there doing it, like, why did she do that? Now I got to go rescue her. I wasn't planning on getting involved in that, but the mentality and the ideology of this country is altogether different. Okay. And I applaud you all. Trust me, I'm not, putting down the fire and venom that you all have for justice and righteousness at all. But sometimes, us brothers, we got to proceed with caution, because if we step hard as we can step, okay, we might not be able to step no more. And that's because we are met with a different, attack or pushback or many things like that, because of, and I granted some brothers, they ain't trying to step up no way, but those that do, okay, you look at how history has dealt with brothers with a voice. Okay, you look at, brothers that have stood up for the cause, for righteousness, for civil rights, how they have been dealt with, and I'm not saying don't step, but I'm just saying step with wisdom and cautiousness, because then that way we can deal with things. And I'm not saying, always in the courtroom like the NAACP. I'm still trying to figure out when the last time they won a victory, because I ain't heard of none. Have y'all heard of any, by the way? NAACP.
Wow.
Yeah. So
when I think about that, though, the fact that, like you said earlier, we're behind enemy lines.
yes.
And to be in that state of mind that the country that you live in is so hostile towards you that you don't feel protected, your children don't feel protected, and even when you win a court case, it's not enforced. So how do we help our children feel empowered when so many of the elected officials that we trust to stand up for us don't? And when it seems like the mood of the country is still having that undercurrent of hostility toward black men, where men do feel like nobody's got my back. And so how do we help our young male children feel powerful in this environment? I mean, we all miss my sister's son, our nephew, but I'm kind of glad that he's in Australia where he's safe. I would be concerned if he came to visit here because of the hostility and the feeling that anything could happen, and as a black man he could be attacked. So how do we keep our children from internalizing fear?
And I think a little bit of fear is good. It's just like when you teach a little kid, um, don't grab that. You say, don't grab that. It's hot. And you teach them the word hot. Okay. And then eventually they reach up there and grab it anyway. And then now they're crying because they didn't grab something that you told them not to do. But now they understand what hot means. I'm going to share something that was shared with me on this last week. One of my associates told me the next time this conversation comes up to bring this up. Are you all familiar with Black's Law?
Black's Law.
Black's Law. BLACKLAW.
I've heard of it, but I'm not sure if
it's a law book.
Okay.
I think
Okay. Yeah.
Thing is,
yeah, it's right. Right. So in Black's Law, in the law books, in every state, there are rules and regulations against black people.
Mm.
Okay, every state. In the state of Illinois, is written in the Constitution that there are rights and privileges that blacks will not have in this state. When blacks, yes, it's still
Yep.
part of the
Yep.
legislature. Okay, when blacks started migrating from the South to the North, the legislatures of that time came together and said, okay, we will not allow black people to do X, Y, Z. Now, I don't know every one of those laws off the top of my head, but they exist. And
That
trust
includes like the redlining and a lot of the government things that were given to GIs, white GIs that weren't always given to black GIs, things like that.
Mhm.
Yes.
right. So understanding that these legislative laws exist, the answer to your question is knowledge is power. We need to always know what is within our bonds of moderation, what are our rights, what can we do, what should we be able to do, and understand what's written for us to be able to, be our safety niche. Okay. So we have to educate our young people to understand what their safety niche is, where their safety lies. And we have to be able to, just like going back into history, we understood coming up from the South on the Underground Railroad that we were not welcome every place.
Mm.
We understood coming up from the South that there were places that we could go and hide out and seek shelter, seek food until we got to our appointed destination, which was in Canada, by the way. Okay, so just keeping that in the mindset. We're not welcome and we're not safe every place, and that goes back to what I said in the very beginning. We are behind enemy lines. I'm sorry. We need to understand that. We need to teach our children that. We need to let them understand that no, you don't have to be afraid, but just be knowledgeable that you have safe places that you can go in this life, that will allow you to be able to, survive today, until we can get to a better place. Now, when that day will happen and come, I don't even know if it's going to happen in my lifetime because I got more years behind me than I do in front of me. But I still like to give people, wisdom and knowledge of the benefit of my experience. See, I saw the riots in the 60s.
Yeah.
Okay. And yeah, I was in Chicago when Mayor Daley, the daddy,
Yep.
decided he was going to
It-
segregate
And
the white
shoot to
schools.
kill. And he
Yep.
was
Okay.
talking about
We were there
murder.
too.
I was on the wrong side of Cottage Grove. Okay. And I had to walk 6 blocks in the white people neighborhood to get to school every day. And the white folks, if you did not grow in a pack or a herd, now I'm a child going to
Mm.
Right.
second, third, fourth grade. Okay. And if we did not leave from that viaduct, because the viaduct separates the black from the white.
Yep.
So if you did not leave in a pack going across that, viaduct into them white people neighborhood, because they would mess with a pack. But if they left before you can get there to meet them, that means you had to run those 6 blocks because a
Ooh.
white person better not catch you walking in their neighborhood. Okay.
Mm.
Now I was a child. Now you talking about what we need to teach our children. This is what we had to learn back in the 60s.
Wow.
Okay. So, and I'm saying today it ain't that much different. There's still open season on us.
Yes.
Okay. And we need to know, we need to have the knowledge. Okay. We need to have the knowledge on what it's going to take for us to survive. Just like they teach the children with a school teacher on the panel. If a hurricane comes down or a tornado comes down or a school shooting comes down, go to this safe place.
Yep.
Mm.
Now that's the reality, okay? And if you're a little black child, run faster and lower, okay?
Mm.
Because they're gonna be aiming for you because we are an endangered species, We are targeted. They don't want us to be adults.
No.
Okay.
But before we go, I know we got to wrap up in a minute.
Yes, ma'am.
And of course, greetings to Sheila Stamps, who's joined us, and Cheryl Jones, who's joined us, and Russian Concussion, I believe, had a few statements last week. Well, one of the things we talk about the fact that we have lived through some things and the future is unknown. Is it possible we can plan to create a different mindset in the next generation? We always say, 50 years from now, the earth will be populated by a new generation of adults, many of whom are yet unborn. Our mission is to nurture them in childhood with love, guidance, and protection, and raise them in healthy, happy families so they can create a world where people can live together in peace. This is our goal. So is that an attainable goal that you see within these next 50 years? How do we seize control of what's being taught to this next generation of whites as well as blacks, so that we're not perpetually living in a state of fear and feeling like victims that could be targeted? How do we free ourselves from that mentality and produce a generation who does not follow the racist attitudes of their foreparents?
Well, I say to that is we can only control what goes on in our households and in our families. We can teach our children that, oh, kumbaya, is going to be all right in the future. But then when they're seeing something that's to the contrary, then we're sending a mixed message. So we have to be true to the message. We have to be true to the facts. We have to be true to what they're seeing and trust that a child, if he has an opportunity to make a change going forward, that he has the ability and the desire to want to do it. So you got to give them both, what it could be and what it really is. Okay. I'm going to say that again. You got to give them what it is and what it could be.
All right.
Okay. Because they have the capacity to be able to understand both. And in your generation and in your era, in your day, it could be this. But right now, today, this is what it is.
Well, I think that's a wise thought. I mean,
I'd like to
have a vision of what it can be, but also the wisdom to know what it is.
Mm-hmm.
I'd like to say also, in that vein, what you can do, 4 letters, VOTE. All politics is local. Run for something, support somebody, and get the legislator you want and the legislature that you want. And if that person doesn't do what they promise, vote them out and vote somebody else in. We need to stop thinking all the big picture, just the presidential. Vote for the dog catcher. Vote for the district attorney. Vote for the sheriff. Vote for whoever is running your local politics. That's who can change things, and you can help be the change you want to see.
Yes.
I agree. Barbara, we got 30 seconds. Last thoughts?
Yeah, become involved in your local school council so you can figure out what's going on even in your schools. That is like one of the beginning places where there are policies met, policies taught, and ideology that is taught to children.
Well, all right. Well, let's make it happen. Well, it's time to go. Thank you so much, Dr. Ron Ford. And
Thank you.
when we can
Thank
see
you.
your shows. I know we've got Tuesday at 5 p.m. Central Time.
Yes, Central Standard Time, 5 p.m. Facebook Live. Ask Dr. Ron.
All right. We'll be watching. Well,
thank you, Dr. Ron.
Thank you.
Ron.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.
And until next time, make sure you all subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us on Facebook, 3 Black Moms. I'm Naima.
I'm Cheryl.
And I'm Barbara. We are 3 Black moms.
And 1 black dad.
Yes. Yes.
Bye-bye.
Hi, I'm Barbara.
I'm Cheryl.
And I'm Naima. We're 3 Black Moms.